Namaskar and a very good morning to all of you. I am Agnidh Baruah and this is my paper titled Language Fluidity and Identity, the Cases of Tenidie and Assamese. Now, when this conference was conceptualized by my supervisor, Dr. Reena Sanasan, I did go through the books that were inaugurated yesterday, and the very first chapter really enriched my thoughts on, how fluid Indian languages are and how the watertight compartmentalization of languages is actually a Eurocentric concept, a social construct taught to us by the colonizers, which we are following till date, right? Now, that is exactly why in moving forward in the Indian context, there is a dire need to decolonize the lens via which one looks at the Bharatiya Bhashas, right? We cannot be moving forward taking with us the colonizers' concept of us. We have to write our own story with our own style, which is that of language fluidity. I'll explain with two case studies of the Tenidie language from Nagaland and the Assamese language of obviously Assam, right? Language fluidity has been a concept which Indians since time immemorial have been very comfortable with. It is with the advent of the colonizers and it is with the advent of the Eurocentric concepts of language compartmentalization that we have taught to, we have been taught that identity has to be watertight compartments. Now, that creates a huge amount of confusion even in the modern day context, which we are still dealing with, which then escalates to identity politics and identity crisis. Now, these are the maps of Nagaland and Manipur. The Tenidie language is spoken around this part, the southern part of Nagaland, the Peren district, the Dimapur, Newland, Chumukdima district, the Kohima district, and half of the Phek district, and the northern parts of Manipur, which are occupied by the Naga tribes, right? So, None district, Tamenglong district, Senapati district, and Kangpokpi district, right? The Tenidie language is a language spoken by 10 tribes, 5 of Nagaland and 5 of Manipur. In Nagaland, the Angamis, the Chakisangs, the Rengmas, the Puchuris, and the Zeliangrongs speak this language. And in Manipur, the Marams, the Thangas, the Maos, the Pomais, and the Inpuis, these 5 communities speak the language. But it is most famously known as the Angami language. What we have to understand is, these terminologies have all, been given to these this particular language only after the advent of the colonizer. Prior to that, these areas, the Naga areas, they had a village nation sort of a concept, right? So, they are just speaking their own respective tongue in their own respective village, and no one was saying that all these 10 tongues combined was supposed to be called the Angami language. This happened with the need for classification in the British administration, something that was not practiced by these tribes before that. Right? Now, I was also confused. This is a part of my thesis work, the Tenidie community, and I was confused between the interrelation between Tenidie and Angami. I had the biggest question in my mind that how can 10 tribes be speaking the same language and still be called 10 different tribes? Then why are they being called 10 different tribes? That's the question. Then I talked to an Angami friend of mine and I gathered more information from other people. And what I got to know was that these 10 communities speak 10 different tongues, and within them even more different tongues. In fact, only 2 to 3 villages speak one kind of a language, right? But it is with classification and the pressure of classifying languages that we are giving it a name. That Inpui, for example, okay, the Inpui tongue. Even within the Inpui community, they might be speaking 50 different varieties of the language, right? Now, one fine day, the Chakisangs suddenly say, no, we want an identity of our own. and then they become a tribe. Because the Chakesangs were called the Eastern Angamis before that, in the British classification, right? So suddenly they say we want an identity of our own. My question was, if we were speaking the exact same language, how do you get a different identity? That's when I got to know that they do not really speak the same language. In linguistic terms, all of them are speaking different languages, which are classified as Tenidi. Alright? And the standardized Tenidi dialect is that of the Angami people nearby Khonoma village. Alright? So today, even within the existing Angamis of today, the people who are inhabiting the Kohima region, the Jahama village, the Kiswema village, Khonoma village, where and the areas near where the Hornbill festival happens, today if a section of them again says that, okay, our village speaks a different language, so we want a tribe name of our own, it can be given. That's how it works. So it is not one language. We have to understand that, right? So, the question of tribal identities. This was my question. Are all the tribes then speaking the same language? And if so, how are they all different tribes then? Right? In the case of the Chakesang, see how recent it is. It is only 1946 that the Chakesang identity got formed. It is not even a real name. It is a portmanteau of the three communities which came together and said that we want to be recognized as a unified Chakesang identity. The Chakru, the Kheza and the Southern Sangtam community. Previous to that, they were called the Eastern Angamis. Even more interesting, the Southern Sangtams. There is already a tribe in Nagaland called the Sangtam tribe. This Southern Sangtam community was called the Southern Sangtam. They came together with two communities which fell under the Eastern Angamis, and together they said, okay, we want to be called Chakesang, and the name came from here, Chakesang. So it is not even a real name, but these people, have they come into existence only in 1946? No, they have been there for time immemorial. It's their land. So they have been there for time immemorial. But the name, the identity is very, very recent. Right? So this is what happens with British administration, with the Eurocentric vision, that you need to classify everyone. You need to put everyone in census. Similar is the case of the Zeliangrong, right? Combining three groups, the Zemi, the Liangmai and the Rongmei. So in the name you see, it's Zeliangrong, right? And it's a very, very recent name. In 15 February 1947, there was a congregation at Impal. I don't know this place, Keshan Thong, maybe ma'am would know. Yes. So, yeah, so in Impal, there was a congregation of all the leaders of these various communities, which then at that time also included the Inpui tribe of None district. And these four communities came together to be called Zeliangrong. Right? So, earlier, these people, earlier also they were speaking the Tenidia language, now also they are speaking the Tenidia language. But earlier they were classified with the Angamis only, but now they have an tribal identity of their own. So these are very artificial categories that we place people in. The people, the culture, the weaving of their shawls, the bamboo craft, their knowledge systems, everything existed since time immemorial. Okay, but with the coming of the British, when they said that you need to have different identities, we need to classify all of you, this entire problem has started. Now, coming to the interesting part, since these people speak different types of Tenidie, right? In linguistic terms, they speak different languages. But in this situation, what does it say about the Assamese language and the Assamese identity in terms of the classical language recognition? Let's look at an interesting case. So, Assamese language is a fairly, not modern, but medieval language. Prior to that, we had Kamrupi, right? Now, which was the region mostly where Kamrupi was being spoken? Starting from here, Dorong, Morigao, from here, North Bengal till Jalpaiguri district, Alipurduar district, or this area, the Rangpur area of Bangladesh and parts of Mymensingh, right? So the so-called Assamese language, at that time, the Kamrupi language, the effect of the Kamrupi language was spread literally from here, in the eastern Arunachal side, all the way up to Bihar, the Purnia district and the Tirhut district, the borders of Mithila, basically, right? And the primary language, at that time the center would be this area, right? At that time the center would be this area. So this is where the ancient kings were, this is where Bhaskar Verma was, this is where Bhagaratta was, okay? And this was the center of culture, this was the center of language and arts, and this was the center of civilization, alright? So this language, was the language in which the ancient texts were written. Now, to classify as a classical language, what do we need? More than 1,500 years of continuous literary works, right? And a substantial evidence of literature, basically. So, while applying for the classical language recognition, Assamese language provided evidence of Charyapadas, the Buddhist dohas, and evidence of other works of authors such as Hem Saraswati and these ancient people, right? Now, these people wrote in this language, roughly the language of Borpeta of the present day Assam. But the language that is called Assamese today, the governmental standardized literary Assamese which is called today, is of this area, Sivsagar. How did that happen? By the time the British came in, the political powers in lower Assam, the western Assam, was already weak. The Koch kingdom was already weak. It was non-existent almost by that time, right? So the Koch kingdom was from here to here. The western part fell under the Mughals and the eastern part fell under the Ahoms. So when the British came, they straight away went and got Sibsagar, which was the capital of the Ahoms. All right. That is where they set up the first printing press. From there, they published the Assamese Bible. So the people, the sort of language that the people were speaking there in Sibsagar around them was made into the standardized Assamese by the British, which is fairly a recent or a new or a medieval basically language, not the ancient language of this part. Now, today when we say Assamese is a classical language, my question was, like how I said, the Chakasang said we need a different identity, Zeliangrong said we need a different identity. Similarly, tomorrow, if the Lower Assam people, if the Kamrupis say we need a different identity, then does Assamese remain a classical language? Does the Sibsagar's language remain a classical language? The Sibsagar's language is not a classical language. It is not that old. The ancient manuscripts were not written in the Sibsagar language, right? So you see how languages function. Now, the problem, okay, so this is one scholar, Upendranath Goswami, who has talked about the Kamrupi language basically. So you see, so the Aryan language spoken first in Assam was the Kamrupi language spoken in Rangpur, Kuch Bihar, Gwalpara, Kamrup district, and see, when you say Gwalpara, it includes the undivided Gwalpara. Gwalpara, Dokhin Khalmara, Dhuburi, Kokrajhar, and Bongaigaon. And when you say Kamrup, it includes Kamrup Metro, Kamrup Rural, Nalbari, Borpeta, and even Baksa for that matter. And Gwalpara also includes Sirang, right? Then Kuch Bihar also includes Kuch Bihar, Jalpaiguri, Alipurduar, the whole area, and Rangpur is of course Rangpur of Bangladesh. And some parts of the Nagaon and Dorong districts. As also put by K.L. Baruah, the Kamrupi dialect was originally a variety of Eastern Maithili, and it was no doubt the spoken Aryan language throughout the kingdom, which then included the whole of Assam Valley and the whole of northern Bengal, with the addition of the Purnia district of Bihar. It is in this Kamrupi language that the early Assamese literature was mainly written. Up to the 17th century, as the center of art, literature and culture were confined within Western Assam, because Upper Assam just had tribes. The Moran, the Sutia, the Borahis, right? So, but this is where the Aryan population mostly was, in Western Assam and North Bengal, right? So, the poets and the writers hailed from this part. The language of this part also acquired prestige. So, when this language started spreading into Eastern Assam, into the tribal belts of Assam, since this language was considered prestigious, the influence of this language spread there, right? But today, we consider the Sibsagar language prestigious. Many Lower Assam people do not wish to also, sound like their original tongue. Now, if then Kamrupi hypothetically starts claiming to be a distinct identity, if they start saying we are different, we need a different identity, how can Assamese, which invariably is synonymous to Sibsagar Assamese, have a claim as a classical language? The problem is not as much as of some language getting dues of another language. The problem is not that the Sibsagar language is getting the credit of the Nalbari language. No, that is not the bigger problem here. The problem is how there is this Eurocentric way of classifying languages and identities into watertight categories. Where does Kamrupi end? Where does Assamese start? On the other side, where does Kamrupi end? Where does Kamatapuri start? Where does Kamatapuri end? Where does Bengali start? And who said that the Kolkata language and the Dhaka language are the same language? Right? So, the problem is the Eurocentric way of classifying languages and identity into watertight categories. Because before the advent of the colonizers, we did not have this culture. There was a fluid culture of language usage. A work such as the Assamese Ramayana, which was written by a person from the present-day Nagaon area, in the language of the present-day Borpeta area, was gone and recited at courts across the Kamrup region, including the court of the Kachari king at Kachar, where we are right now. Today, the Sylheti people consider themselves Bengali. Even if they are Sylheti, they are not the same as the Assamese people of the Brahmaputra Valley by their own consideration. But at that time, the language was fluid, right? So, something written in the language of the Borpeta region was also recited here, and the people understood it. Similarly, it was recited in the courts of Rangpur and also North Bengal and also Upper Assam, obviously, right? Eastern Assam, obviously. At the time, there was no need for these strict compartmentalization of languages and identities. But today, would a person from Silchar understand what a person from Borpeta is speaking if they are speaking in their absolute native tongue? So this is what colonization has done to us, to the Indians, to the Indian culture, right? And us forgetting our cultural memory of being comfortable with the fluidity of languages. Today, we are all about the strict watertight compartments of identity, but at one time we were comfortable with the fluidity of languages. In fact, Aryan languages do not end in Assam. They move on to Manipur as well. Today, what do we associate Manipur mostly with? The Meitei language, which is a Tibeto-Burman language. But how can we forget that there is the Vishnupriya language as well, which is very much an Indo-Aryan language. When someone speaks Vishnupriya, I understand half of it. Right? So the language continuity was always there. Right? And these ideas are something that the Bharatiya Bhasha Pariwar seeks to work on and bring back the awareness for. Thank you so much.